Hello, so just the other day I asked a question which is basically just echoing from Paul from Team APS said, which is what new things do you want to see from Yu-Gi-Oh! In 2023 to keep the game fresh and exciting. Obviously, I just added in Vanguard, so you just replace Yu-Gi-Oh! With Vanguard. And I just thought I'd go through like some of the responses. I need to be as quick as I can though, because it's very easy to kind of spend hours replying, so there's quite a lot of comments here. So we're just going to go through each of these. So to start with, Scissoring Gwen said, standard reprint set, premium collection, the new ride fixer promos for Novas, Lawkeeper support, Worlds in Japan, Mr. Invincible, and Gold Rutal returning V. So like standard reprint set. This wasn't surprising because I've seen quite a lot of complaints going on right now about the availability of cards. I think this is mainly because of the fact that there's so many generic cards. Like Nations as a system was always going to be a problem for this sort of thing. But obviously, you have archetype restrictions. It kind of helps a bit, but obviously if it's not archetype restricted, then there's a bit of issue there. But there's also the whole thing about triple rares and the pull rates going down, because, or rather the pull rates are still the same, I think, but it's like what it was is that they increased the amount of triple rares to collect. So because of that, you can't get the triple rare you want as easily, so there's going to be less of each one in a case. So certain popular decks, for example Youth Bug, also a deck that, by the way, has a trial deck. So if you bought the trial deck, then you're already going to be more invested into it. So it's like they sort of try to promote this trial deck so they can promote cards in the booster set, but then they make the cards in the booster sets harder to get than some of the triple rares of the past. Then we've got Premium Collection, which is, again, like it's always going to be a popular one, I think, because we don't really get enough premium stuff in this game. So I think like loads more premium is always going to be great. And then we've got new ride fixes, which is basically based on the Aquaforce stuff. Well, I think it was Aquaforce and Nubatama. Both of them got it. So got promos recently where you can basically discard this grade 2. And what the grade 2 would do is that it will check, like, I think top 7 or something. You look for a grade 2 and you can ride it. But there are risks because it's at the end of the ride phase. So when you discard that grade 2, you're basically, if you end up not finding that another grade 2 to replace it with, then you've already paid the cost and you've lost that grade 2 in hand, so you can't actually G-assist if you have basically paid the cost for no reason. So there are risks to it. It also tends to have like an amber clone skill attached to it, because both Nubatama and Aquaforce ones had that sort of ability where when it's boosted, you basically get to do some sort of ability. And I think it was like a Soul Blast cost or something as well. The other thing about Lawkeeper, so yeah, Lawkeeper support is interesting because the thing is with Clan Collection, like at most you get like 3 cards per wave. But Lawkeeper in particular didn't even get anything because they had 3 grade 3s in one go, and so they didn't really have any support cards designed specifically for Lawkeeper. You just use whatever generic card grid cards already exist. So obviously some spice is always nice, especially trying to elevate it a bit more. Worlds in Japan, it's an interesting one because basically what happened is that in Japan they basically barred off tourism. So people couldn't come into the country, and because of that, they had to kind of change how they're doing the World Championships this time around. And because of that, Worlds end up taking place in LA, which is going to be next month. And obviously that might start a thing where it's like, oh, should we have Worlds in other countries rather than Japan? But obviously, a lot of people, they kind of enjoy the idea of trying to qualify so they can go to Japan and play there instead, because Japan's quite a popular place, especially among communities like this, where, you know, the anime kind of card game sort of thing, where a lot of people just kind of grow up like wanting to go to Japan as well. So it makes sense. That one, Mr. Invincible plus Gold Rutal. So them coming back in V. I think had there been another Clan Collection or so, I think these would have been the next cards. I think Gold Rutal was one I was thinking of could be the next Nova boss, because I was thinking about Oracle Think Tank, and Sakuya was like a contemporary card that came out in the same kind of wave, and both Oracle Think Tank and Overgrab had a trial deck at the same time, trial deck 3 and 4, the 3rd and 4th ever ones in the entire game. So we've never seen a retrain for Sakuya, but Sakuya was quite a popular card because you could literally bounce stuff from the field to hand, which is like, I think the only Oracle Think Tank card that can actually choose cards and bounce them. It doesn't even choose, actually, just takes everything, there's no targeting. So it's pretty popular grade 3. I've seen people like making lists with it, even like late into G era. But I think by V series, it's just started falling off entirely. Then next we got Christopher Garcia. Basically reprint trigger effects that aren't box toppers. So there's been this whole thing about trigger effects getting reprints. I think they got some just recently, but they're not as common to get. I think the reason why is they didn't want to, like, you know, crash the whole thing, because obviously there are people who still have the cards, and obviously it's a bit nice if you can kind of trade / sell them off to make some value as well, especially if you've been buying boxes and cases and things and you're looking for money to make back on things. So they are a bit sure they are going to be I mean, like, they haven't been 100% consistent on it lately, but it's generally a good thing, because like to do it that way, because obviously you kind of want to feel like your cards still have some value, but also the triggers, like, they haven't really been that expensive generally as a card. Obviously as a single they are expensive for a single that's not been out for that long, but trying to crash the prices is not really what I think they'd want to achieve either, because I think even then stores are depending on selling these rare triggers to make some value as well. So obviously if you price crash things hard, then it's going to put people off, like both collectors and also stores in a way. So they are trying to be a bit careful there, but obviously there are cases where it's gone the other way around, where I think in V-Clan collection it kind of did tank a lot of cards in that particular case. Then the other thing as well is that Sheriff mentions that Fighters collection style for D, which is just new generic ride lines and some support for them. So that's an interesting one, because we had this early on in the series, where I think I don't think it was the very first. I think the very first one might have been a reprint set, but the second Fighters collection, which is the first one we got here, they had Limerick bosses, and so you could play like all these random things. Like there was some Liberator card. I remember there was like Persephone, Genesis, etc. The popular one was the D Police one, actually. There was like a whole kind of Daikaiser support package as well that came out. That was like the expensive card at the time, but for some reason when we got in English, it was kind of a bit late. But in Japan, it was it was really hyped when people were looking at it from at the Japan side of things. So that's actually something they could possibly end up doing, like just kind of, if you're going to do D Nations, have some generics, obviously basic generics, but you could just shove in a whole bunch of ride lines. Like there are some themes that are missing right now. I find it kind of funny, like Lyrical Monasteries had like so many ride lines now, because originally it was meant to be one set a year, but then they bumped up to 2, so they went from it being more of a casual kind of, just the separating Bermuda from the rest of the game. But obviously Bermuda's always been a bit over supported back in the clan fight era, but like they try to kind of, I think, kind of tone them down a bit, but then suddenly they just want to cash in on the lyricals and they just make it twice a year. So now idols are just way too overrepresented in the D series, even compared to like the old days. Easily, like it's way more overrepresented because of the amount of ride lines they've got now. And you look at like Power Moon and Angel Feathers, and they've not had a single representation of a ride line yet in D series. So that could be a positive. Like if they were to do a set like Fighters Collection, then obviously it kind of can destigmatize just how cringe this excessive amount of Lyrical Monastery ride line is right now, by kind of adding more to the other nations as well. Just kind of an interesting idea. And then the next thing, Narka mentions more effect triggers in V and P, especially what we call the effect crits in V. So we don't actually had any effect triggers except for Draw Perfect Guards and then Grade 3 Heals, but they're all generics. And in Premium Collection, criticals as well, which can only be played in Premium format. So that's really all we've had. And D series, they've also had just generic triggers as well. We've not actually had any original triggers whatsoever since G series. So the last card I think we had was some Bermuda Zero Power critical trigger, and maybe some Reindeer crit. If I don't know if it's from that set or if it's from a different set, but there were like a few triggers that came out, like I think at the end of G, but that was it. And we've just not had anything original since then. So there is definitely like a craving for just some, things like fresh triggers, fresh starting Vanguards that actually have different abilities rather than just everything being homogenized. Next we've got Casualty Jeweler saying the cards art are wearing too much clothes. In my opinion, yeah, that is very true. There's just way too much, so they definitely need to start just making them a bit more moderate. Next we've got Sage, Daimonis Unrestrict, Zazen to 1 in Grand Blue, standard reprints again, and Peak Collection with a countercharge G Guard for Grand Blue. Oh, actually that's an interesting one, because that actually would help them, and also it would probably mean they'll rely less on that countercharge 2 Grenache as well. But yeah, Daimonis Unrestrict, I think there's actually a way you could make that happen, because I think Daimonis has taken a bit too much heat. Like, there was always a choice if they wanted to nerf DI. like the thing that people used to say is, oh, it just scales too much if you make new grade 3s, all this like future proofing stuff. But the thing is that the only two grade 3s that Diamonds was ever crazy with was No Life King and Gastille. And Gastille is just an insane card, the grade 3 Gastille. And even now, you can sort of like Mystery Flare Dragon it in a way, but that's the thing, it's very similar to Mystery Flare Dragon, where it's like an auto win card if you pull it out. But obviously, it's about as good as the engine allows it to be. So once Mystery Flare Dragon got a good Bind Zone engine, which was in Reinnovate Dragon, then suddenly Mystery Flare Dragon became like a turbo OTK deck. That's the kind of card Gastille is. It's a Dark Zone trait apparently. But then No Life King has just been taking over the clan ever since like its introduction. So obviously, if you nerfed NLK and Gastille grade 3s, I think Daimonos the banning of Daimonos would just be irrelevant, basically. So it's definitely like, I feel like the discourse did kind of like limit it to, oh yeah, only Daimonos should have ever went, and yeah, definitely nothing to like the two specific grade 3s they made, because to be fair, they could have like made, I don't know, Shahara or something, right, benefit from Gastille the Stride if they wanted to. I mean, it's never really been that bad, to be fair, like with anything outside those two. And those two are just really insane grade 3s, like uniquely insane compared to a lot of other grade 3s in the game. So next, let's see. Kaiju was saying a revision to Blitz orders unlimited their uses in a turn. Okay, so this one is interesting. So the thing is that orders, when they first came into the game, were sort of like a side feature. They weren't really trying to push it in the same way as like G Guardians, Stride. I mean, even G Guards was sort of, well, it was pushed more than orders, that's for sure, because everyone would play them. But it wasn't like the kind of main feature. And with orders, it's kind of like a new addition to the game that any clan could use. But it was never treated as like the main thing. It's sort of like pendulums and Yu-Gi-Oh or something. Like not everyone's supposed to really play them, but obviously they have their downsides, which is that they make your deck less consistent if you're playing them in traditional Vanguard, which is, you know, no ride deck, because you just get more clumpy cards and you might brick and not ride properly. So there's always that risk, and you just end up deciding to be more selective. Normally, if you play like a heavy grade 3 deck, then you just don't bother. What we did see in Vista is that because they changed the mulligan rules, where you basically put all your cards from your hand to bottom of your deck, and then you draw from the top. Because of that, basically playing higher grade 3s in your deck actually worked out better, as long as you weren't in a format where there's like high roll OTK while you're on grade 2 or something. But generally, like, it's not been as bad to play more grade 3s because of the revised mulligan rules. But before that, it was always considered risky, so people like to kind of keep it as low as possible to like ideally 6-ish, usually. Usually the most competitive decks. Like heavy grade 3s was kind of bad with the old mulligan rules because you just randomize your deck again and you're not actually reducing the chances of seeing cards. But orders are sort of in a way like drawing to excess grade 3s where they have like no shield value, and so they kind of like just support cards really, like any kind of spec grade 3s you play. So an order is sort of like, it's sort of like playing Victorious Deer or Piano, like Mellow Museum's Colossus, you know, those sort of cards, right? Or Hope on Damp. So the kind of cards you're not really trying to ride, but they're just like strong kind of extra cards in your deck that you just want to draw into once you've sorted out your riding, and then just play them. That's pretty much what they are. But orders, yeah, they're not really meant to be a main thing. But I think with D series, I can see why like this idea of like uncapping them is quite appealing. Obviously, there are risks in premium format. Well, actually, there's risks to playing them as well. But I think the risk in premium would be like, imagine Elementaria Sanctude, but worse. And some decks already know how bad it can be for some decks. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Next to you says reprint and more support for P. Generic things from D plus P collection and probably V collection for any. So yeah, D is obviously a popular one. But obviously, you know, there's always going to be a bit of demand for like a kind of reintroduction barrier to try out, like, well, reintroduction point, sorry, to try out like a new deck, or sorry, an older deck. I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh! Sort of does it because they do like structure decks and things as well, where they just reprint some old cards and then just add in a few new cards as well. And they even put like staples in there actually as well. Okay, so it's a bit like Blitz orders in a way, because Blitz orders in, you know, current Vanguard trial decks a lot of people aren't really a fan of it because you're just printing a generic, and you're making people want to like need to buy a trial deck, which it's kind of always been weird. Like, I don't want to buy a trial deck if I'm not going to play that deck. Whereas there's always kind of a bit of a different reaction when you're getting for a booster set. But even though it is still a generic chase card, and that in itself isn't always going to be that popular. Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh does actually do that quite a bit with their trial decks or structure decks even. And then next, I don't know if it's Purwa or Puva, so I don't want to butcher your name. Reprints or less good generic cards because the prices are getting crazy. So yeah, it's like the Brainwash Swallow kind of effect. So Brainwash Swallow, by the way, was an 8-off in every case because the triple res and double res in like the first 3 sets of the game, you had like exactly 8 copies of each card. And what would happen is that Brainwash Swallow was actually valued on release. It was like one of the few non-boss cards that was at least like a tenner when it came out. And I had even the SP as well. Funny enough, I kind of traded the Swallow plus a lot more to get a Himiko VSR, but I think the Swallow SP might be worth almost the same now as Himiko VSR. So I've taken quite a bit of an L on that one. I mean, I knew Himiko was going to go down. I always knew it was overpriced on release, but Brainwash Swallow skyrocketed quite a bit. It's sort of like not as bad as Turgard of the Underworld from Yu-Gi-Oh, but I remember that card. I was thinking, yeah, Turgard is definitely a card that was going to go up. I just didn't expect it to go that high up. Back, you know, from the sneak peek up until like a few months in when they went to Xyz format. Yeah, that's another thing. Like, people are getting put off by the generics, and obviously generics work better in clan fight. Yeah, there's always like downsides to generics, but at least with clan fight, it's like there's at least some level of restriction, which makes things a bit easier, and then it leads to like less kind of. I mean, I don't want to even say exploiting. In some situations, they could be exploiting, but in other situations, you just want to make back your money because the other cards that you've got in your cases just aren't really doing anything in terms of recouping. So there is that too as well. Next, Wolfrin says units are also orders. That would be cool to see. Also, Hollows and SPs back. And actually, someone's replied and saying apparently that Walter's an order unit. I didn't actually know about that. But that's interesting to hear. I do know about the over triggers that they made into orders. I did think that was a good idea because I was thinking about it before they even revealed over triggers. Like, hey, wouldn't it be interesting if they made triggers into orders? So you basically trade off having hard printed shield value on the trigger, but then you're also making use of those trigger slots to play something interesting. Because I think like one of the downsides to Vanguard deck building, and sort of why I wish we had effect triggers again, because G era was very good for this, is that having more like deck building creativity by using up the trigger slots is always like kind of nice. It's also why when Draw Perfect Gods came out, like some people praised it, like they actually liked it, even though it did kill off grade 1 or higher guard restrict decks. It does have the upsides of, I mean, they could have just made them grade 1 draw PGs to be fair, but it does have the upsides of basically freeing up your grade 1 slots so you can play interesting effects as well. So it's usually this sort of stuff people look out for. Even like in Jira, like one of the things people did not like was the 4-off staple Straticists as well, because that too took up slots. So you basically had like 8 locked positions in your grade 1 lineup. So most of the creativity was actually in your grade 2 lineup back in Jira. So yeah, it's definitely interesting to merge the two. And then Nini-chan says reprints. Also just new mechanics / gimmicks in general, because standard is starting to get flooded with every deck just wanting to do 4+ attacks and draw a lot. So that kind of reminds me of actually during the late limit break when I used to see people complaining about restands because there's just too many of them. And I know they did like guard restricts, for example. There's been all kinds of creative things that have happened over time in the game, especially into like in G series we've seen it in V series as well, where they just try to kind of diversify the different types of pressure and finisher cards. And then we went to D series. I mean, I could be overstating this, but it does feel like they did nerf the idea of guard restricts. Like they kind of just pulled back a bit on it. It kind of just feels a bit like the Link Joker in a way, because Link Joker with locking in V-Series was kind of removed and they just replaced locking with binding instead. It sort of reminds me of that kind of thing, where it's just like maybe they're a bit like unsure about whether they want to just throw this in, because they kind of want to in a way kind of baby the game, so they kind of don't want it to be like too difficult looking, even though it's a bit like debatable. But basically you just want to make the format look like if you're you're new, you don't really want to be put off so much. So there's probably that thinking behind it, maybe, because obviously like locking is such a turn off. Like when people first go against Chaos Breaker Dragon, I don't think Nebula was that bad when it first came out, but Chaos Breaker Dragon will just spam lock like constantly, and if you're like new to the game, or even some of the decks in the game were getting ruined by Chaos Breaker, to be fair, but like you go into that, and that's your impression, and then you just get turned off because you realize, oh wait, I'm not interacting, I'm playing the game. So if you're trying to like introduce players through like a beginner's sort of format that you're pushing right now, because these rotations, they are basically like beginners formats, that's kind of like an entry point attempt. So it's like a first impressions thing, and you don't want to make it look too overwhelming. So it's a weird one because the trade-off is that it does make decks a bit more well, less creative in a way. They aren't using as many ideas, like they're kind of handicapping it in a sense, compared to a more advanced format where they can kind of just do whatever they want almost. Next we've got Kay basically mentioning, can premium Angel Feathers get a good way to run deck out and a real offensive stride? Pretty please and thank you. Zafkyo and Hospital G-Gull was a good start. So the last Angel Feather Spell was actually quite popular because I noticed people were actually building Angel Feathers when they first revealed the cards. I've seen people going after Haruts and everything. I've seen people testing it, but then it just kind of fell off quite quick as well. But yeah, decking out, I mean, this is so similar to Oracle Think Tank. Oracle Think Tank and Angel Feathers are kind of like one and the same, because it does feel like there's an attempt, although I think it's much more stricter maybe with Angel Feathers, but there's been like an attempt to try not to give too much aggressive stuff to these decks as well. And like Oracle Think Tank for quite a long time was a turn 4 deck, and then they made Momo, but Momo is like a very risky card because you do have to burn through 3 in hand as well. And there's also things like well, now we've got Witches and we've got Magus, which is alternate ways of doing multi-attacks and things, but obviously they try to design it so it doesn't synergize with the deck too much. So it's a bit like Nocia, where it's like a clan within the clan kind of thing. They try to kind of play a bit safe, so it's like, okay, you can have your multi-attacks now, but let's just do something to try and make it a bit more awkward so you can't just mesh it that easily with everything. That's how it kind of looked. But the anti-deck out thing is also interesting, because the thing is once you've got that turn 4 deck, then you're basically risking yourself decking out, because if your opponent survives a turn 4 play when you're finally playing the game, right, then it's kind of a problem. Like I always had to build my decks to try and be early game aggro in Oracle Think Tank, because I just need to try and get them into the high damage range as much as I can. That way turn 4 winning becomes more achievable, because if you don't win on turn 4, you're not winning. It's so hard at that point. Like you're very unlikely to win after turn 4, because what happens is your deck runs out basically, and you might not be able to do triple drive, or you might just guard too much that even if you were to triple drive, you'd then have to use Ichikishima and then draw 2 cards, and then oh, I'm decking out still anyway if I do my triple drive. So there are some issues there, and even the draw 2 might just not be enough to even get you on Oracle. So there's always been a whole bunch of issues with that, with decking out. Like you are playing a time bomb deck. Next, Kuroneko. New playstyles that CSN efficiently mold its way into premium Bermuda. I'm not sure what CSN is, but seeing as he's saying mold its way into premium, I'm guessing he's talking about some sort of lyrical deck. It gets boring after a while, and my Medial idea, that's the elf Radland they introduced recently, have been sitting on the bench for so long I'm too lazy to actually test. Yeah, so it's actually interesting because in D series, I mean this has actually been a benefit, but in D series, what we've had is that there's been this thing where V series cards, well, I would like to say G series as well, but nah, V series cards have kind of crept out a lot of G series grade 3s. But an advantage of D series is that they didn't do that in D. Instead, they kind of just made them more for the new format, and they've kind of just added more shell life to premium as a result. So what it's done is, and you've also got like the reprint set with Revel Selection, and the good thing about this is that people were more encouraged to just build random decks. So there was quite a bit of a premium boom that happened during that time, where more people pick up the format, more people like building all this random stuff. Even I was getting into it as well. I started also building decks too, extra decks, like, because I know like you get to a point where you start kind of picking and choosing. Otherwise, if the if you feel like there's a lot of hard selling, which is what V Series did do a bit too much of, there was a lot of hard selling going on in that era. And obviously, if you feel like you're being pushed to, like focus on the next new wave every time rather than like revisiting decks that already exist in the market, then every time a new wave of support comes out, you're only going to build like one deck at a time, and you're going to be less interested in building multiple. Even when D actually did the reboot initially, I've seen people build loads of decks for D format, but now I don't think people really care to build loads of decks anymore. Like I think people are becoming more and more selective now with deck building as as the format matures. But it's also because I think the chopper rares, like the pull rates, are a lot worse, and building decks is just becoming like a pain, like maintaining them and everything. It's not very appealing. Like if the format feels, or rather the game feels cheap and people have more spare money to spend, basically, where they can where they don't have to actually worry about anticipating anymore, then what tends to happen is people will just spend to make spare decks and other casual fun things, basically. So for D format, it's obviously not kind of in that state as much now as it was before, but with premium at least, you're kind of able to benefit from it, because premium things aren't really moving aggressively right now. It hasn't really moved that aggressively in general, to be fair, except like gift marker grade 3s and things pushing out Geo grade 3s, but yeah, generally it's been alright. So that's kind of a plus side, but obviously it's always interesting like when people can come up with D decks and then just try them out in like the premium game as well. And I think that's probably what's being asked here, like just having stuff that can kind of put it into premium format. But I do hope if they do premium collection sets, they still focus on the old decks, because I think that's kind of like where you're getting that kind of lack of support as well. Next, Lonely Wolf. So Lonely Wolf mentions Crest nerfed or a card that counts it, and it is a common or rare. So I'm gonna guess this is about the D form, because I've heard Chrono Jet is topping a lot in Japan, and it's kind of interesting because it's basically a G-era deck and they just slapped it to D. Now D is quite relatively strong, not as strong as V-era, but I'd say it's somewhere in the G-era level, definitely not old Vanguard. I think it's stronger than old Vanguard, and I think what must be going on is that because of the power level, like strides have massive power, and I remember people used to say, there's not enough defense in the game, and I don't think right now, it's kind of weird because they've got 15k triggers, so technically those shields do help a bit, but obviously the heals are like 15k shields as well, so there is a bit of it's a bit of a strange, but you've got fronts that can be 20k shields if you choose to play those, draws that have 10k shields, but you don't have G Guardians. Now, I don't know what the power level is like, but I could imagine it being quite disruptive in the flow of how D is designed, because it's Stride. It's designed for like Stride from everything. It's obviously an interesting product, but obviously that doesn't come without like some sort of disruption to the way the D format is played. So I can kind of see, like, I can kind of guess it being the case that some people might not be happy with the Jet situation. Reprints of staples with the triggers with text, inlet, swirler, and so on. So triggers with text, I think that's the effect triggers. Yeah, because they're generic staples. So yeah, it's again similar to some of the other requests about standard reprints. As well, like Swirler, famous one. I forgot about Inlet actually. Inlet Pulse is another one. That card is the first BCS promo price card actually for D series. They chose Inlet of all things, which is kind of random. Fasada was the first one for Team League. So next we've got Saab mentioning better case ratios, Brufus support. That's again interesting because the thing is with Dark Regulars, it's been basically the No Life King clan. Like Sage pretty much mentioned Guest of Diamonds. I kind of went on about No Life King after that, but basically there's not really been like much outside of No Life King and then just a brief period of grade 3 Guest deal. And that's been very bad for Identity. I've spoken to Dark Regular players and they've not been happy about how Dark Regulars has been. It's been very awkward. Like it's just been more and more No Life King support basically. Like everything just ends up being No Life King support. I know like early V series, I wasn't too happy about Oracle Think Tank support cards being Ichikishima support, but at least Ichikishima is a Stride and not a grade 3 boss, because if a grade 3 boss took over the clan, then where's Shahara Vampire, for example, right? it's kind of pretty bad. So yeah, Brufus is another VR that they made, and that card was only ever used with Gastel Daimos, which is now banned, and that was like the Brufus No Life King combo as well. But obviously Brufus is a weaker grade 3, and it would benefit from Gastel Daimonos. So like if No Life King and Gastel were in some way nerfed out, then Gastel Daimonos would actually be like a lot better. Like I just couldn't see anyone justifying it being banned, because I think again it's kind of like people focus too much on like, oh no, it's Gastel is a problem because they'll just print more grade 3s and stuff. It's like, yeah, but like that's like assuming the grade 3 is gonna be broken or something, and most of them aren't. So I think it's kind of fine. It's kind of like Crystal Luster Dragon. Crystal Luster Dragon was fine. The only time it got strong was Jewel Knight Salome. That's it. It's never been that bad outside of Jewel Knight Salome. Even Chain Rank and Shadow Paladins, I think the best it ever got to was maybe Raging Form Dragon. I think that's probably it. And even then, it's not as crazy. In fact, the only reason why Chain Ranking can even be a threat is because Raging Form Dragon can build momentum with its previous attack of lots of aggro. To snipe a lot of handouts so that you're not as well prepared for Chain Rank in the following turn, which is kind of like where most of the strength of Chain Rank even came from in the first place. So it's not like these cards aren't like inherently that crazy to begin with. It's just that they print like one grade 3 and then suddenly it's like insane with it because they went above the standards of how strong a grade 3 is supposed to be in that clan, if that makes any sense. Next we've got Visus was mentioning top of the list is Nation Staples reissues. Standard has become poisonously price gated as we head into year through the format. So yeah, it's kind of crazy that there are issues people are having with getting hold of cards like this early, because this we haven't even reached set 8 yet, like boost set 8. So stuff should in theory be a bit more accessible, I would think. But I'm not paying too much attention to the D market these days because I've kind of fallen off. I bought like the early cases, but then I kind of just fell off entirely. Well, I'm getting set 8, but that's for a whole different reason. And I'm just not gonna wear myself out tuning into like every single booster that comes out like so regularly. I'd rather just kind of focus a bit more on other things. So I'll just wait until the next clan collection, whatever comes out, I guess. Next we've got Twink Fight Vanguard mentioning Premium Collection, Clan Collection, good Blitz orders, broken Grand Blue cards. So yeah, you can see another one of the Blitz orders ideas as well. In this case, just having like more Blitz orders. I think the D series ones, most of them except Elementary Sanctuary, aren't really that strong, I don't think, but I've not really paid attention to most of the effects, to be fair, like that have come out recently. I'm only just going off of like the early D series stuff. But yeah, Premium Clan Collection, always good to have more clan fight support. And Broken Grand Blue cards. Honestly, if they're going to do Broken Grand Blue, they need to like bring Cocytus. They need to bring Peanut Noir, I think the name was. Like some of the other bosses, because we've only had like one variant of Grand Blue for a very long time now, which is Night Rose Beatrice Skull Giant, and it's just amazing that there's been no attempt after all this time, like both with Dark Irregulars really, although technically this gas still grade 3. So even Dark Regulars have done it a little bit more. But like Grand Blue, there's been no attempt, like real attempt whatsoever, to try and push a different variant of the clan. And it's just in a really bad state. Like Grand Blue does have one competitive deck right now that people are using in tournaments, but honestly, I just don't find that a satisfying state. Like it's sort of like where we're at now with Genesis because the Taro ban last year. It's just kind of boring. Like if you're only playing one variant all the time. Oracle Think Tank, one of the other clans I main, I'm enjoying a lot more because I can just build like any variant of it and they're fine. I mean, the only thing that's annoying is the new Blitz Order perfect card thing, but other than that, it's got a lot of options. You can use any core of the deck and just play it. So that's kind of like something we're benefiting from in that clan, which a few other clans aren't really. Even Bermuda Triangle, you can play like a lot of variants, by the way, because I mean they've supported it very well with the clan boosters they've done. So even though everyone's like kind of playing the reindeer deck right now, there are other variants that are pretty solid as well. There's like Riviere, there's like Prisms, just to name a few. I think Coral, I'm not sure actually where Coral's at these days, but I know at the end of G it was definitely popular. Next, going to the next one from JM Haynes. I want to see them actually give Baramagus a new triple rare. The only archetype specific triple rare we have is Barrow himself. While my wallet appreciates the most of the deck is low rarity, it's still disrespectful of Bushiroad to give every other archetype multiple triple rares while he gets Jack. That's an interesting one because Baramagnus has always been sort of like a sibling card to Hex Orb Sorcerers, and I guess Eugene as well. But I remember like they used to promote the two together. I think when they revealed them, they just showed like both Baramags and Hex Orb. And the funny thing about that is, like with Hex Orb, I've seen a lot of triple rares because I've been collecting them. So they've made a whole bunch of them, and I'm a bit surprised to see that Baramagus hasn't actually had any triple rare cards. Obviously, there's pluses and downsides. Budget players win. If you want to bling your decks, though, you don't win. I mean, maybe they could just like reprint some cards, like in a festival collection style set again, and just make some of the stuff foils. They could be doing that a bit more. Like, there's a reason I think Festival Collection 1, like there's a reason I think it's so good, is that it's not simply about just selling new cards. It's actually trying to do something else for once, which I really like, because I think Vanguard is just, there's too much product, which is mainly just about selling new cards. Like, we very rarely get a product that's actually trying to achieve a different objective. Like, you can compare it to other card games. Let's just take Yu-Gi-Oh! Easy example. Yu-Gi-Oh! Isn't just simply trying to sell new cards in every single product. There's all kinds of different kind of audiences that they're trying to cater to with it. Like, there's reprint sets as well, like quite a lot of reprint sets in the game actually, and there's always something, because you can do all kinds of things. You can either make things easier to get, or you can make blinged out versions of cards for anyone that just wants to have something shiny to play with. It's just kind of like kind of appealing to people's kind of collectors' impulses, but also people just like to play with nice looking things, because, you know, there are obviously like reasons. Like, sometimes you might decide, okay, you've got a budget to spend on the game, right? You can either build more decks, or you can just maybe bling out a few decks that you like even more as well with that. So there's all kinds of different directions you can take with how you do your collecting in this game. So yeah, we've got quite a few comments here about reprints as well. Meow, and then there's also Yusio. She mentions Premium Collection and Clan Collection. So they haven't actually revealed this in the latest product schedule. Gogot-san mentions Percival Backup 4 in V, not for Gogot. So yeah, that ban is a shame really, because you can't play it. I'm just glad you can at least play in Premium, but Percival isn't a very good design card, because when they made it, technically they locked themselves out of being able to print more grade 3s for golds to support. But obviously they ended Clan Fight by then, and we only had like Clan Collections, so there's not really been as much to promote. So maybe Percival was intended for the long run when they made it, which is why they probably went generic. Either that, or they just got they just went to try and hard sell somehow, and they were just thinking too short term. Either way, yeah, they could have just made it Liberator locked. Obviously, in that set, it wouldn't have been as great, because only Percival would work with himself, but Prominence Core came out later, and at the moment Percival isn't really that easy to get. So there's that too. I think only Agrava has so far been reprinted, if I'm not mistaken. Premium Collection with main deck cards, yeah, we definitely need those. Triggers, for example, or even just normal units would be good. Even some new types of units. We've only had really like very boring generics like the Zars and stuff, which obviously got banned. I mean, vanillas are interesting as a concept, but it just felt like it was sort of trying to sell to like a wider group, because everyone can build vanillas in any clan, and it wasn't really an attempt to revive older decks which are a bit more niche, such as a keyword based deck, so Rescue, or, you know, like Oracle, Brave, etc. Garmor in V, I'm not sure which version of Garmor he's talking about, because there's like 3 of them. We do have the normal gold pattern one in V, but we don't have Liberate, and we don't have Raw pattern, I'm pretty sure. So there is like a chance to make other versions of Garmor. V and Premium reprint set. So yeah, like there's still some demand, as we can see in the comments, about that. Obviously it depends what kind of reprint set, because I mean, it's really complicated. Like reprint set, there's always going to be differences in how you'd want reprint set to go. Like, I'm not really entirely a fan of Revolve Selection. There are like some cards which are fairly easy enough to get, like in a good way, but then there's some, I think they made them too easy as well. Like because the thing with Revolve Selection is that they made every card equally easy to pull. So there are cards that you might believe, oh, maybe they shouldn't have made that one too easy, and that's kind of like where the disagreement kind of comes in. Like it can devalue stuff that's already affordable in the market a bit too much and just tank it and then just make it almost impossible to sell, which is obviously not good for the secondary market either. But obviously, like the set did, I think it did kind of eradicate a lot of that kind of exploiting of prices that was going on as well. So I don't think there's actually any cards right this moment that actually need, like, at least from my experience, that actually need a reprint. I think everything is like fairly affordable. Like the most expensive cards I think might just be subclan restricted stuff from what I've paid attention to, but feel free to correct me on this in the comments below if there's any like generic cards that are actually being you know, priced crazy, because I've not really noticed that actually. A Keta deck whose main mechanic is Spiracle from deck or Angel inspired, yes. So funny enough, Lyrical Monastery has an Angel themed ride line from the very first Lyrical set, and I'm just wondering how many Lyrical ride lines there will be until Keta finally gets an Angel Feather themed ride line. It's just kind of crazy, it still hasn't happened yet. And then Michael was mentioning another P-Clan collection, this time with new effect triggers and grade 3s with both gifts and stride skills, as well as new strides and G-Guard. So I think the idea is, I think, well, effect triggers, yeah, definitely more effect triggers. I think with the grade 3s, it's like, I think people do enjoy like the on stride abilities. They were very fun. Honestly, I like them a lot more than gift markers, which is why G is, in my opinion, like peak Vanguard, because the on stride abilities, and also like what they did with the legacy game, like all these old grade 3s that don't have old stride abilities, they tried to still make them good. In that, okay, sure, you don't have a stride skill, like an on stride skill, but you do have the heart name, which is a bonus to getting that exclusive stride ability for that boss card. So they kind of like still gave it something in the process, which was pretty good. And that being said, I think there's another way around it rather than making gifts. Like, you could also just do what they did recently with Stride deck set, which is Chrome Jet and Messiah, they both got crests. And rather than like just homogenize the game with even more gifts, which I think is just getting really stale if they just keep doing gifts, maybe like they could invent these crests, which are basically like extensions to those grade 3s in a way. So you're kind of modernizing and updating them with this extra kind of layer of abilities, sort of. Although there is an argument to be made that it does complicate the game a bit more, but yeah, you could do that. And when I say complicate, I mean like it just means your opponent has to pay attention to more text that's on your field. It's like Valkyrian, actually not even Valkyrian, because you don't really care if you're the opponent, because your opponent will sort out the Valkyrian stuff for you as long as you trust them to not get something wrong. But I think a better example is like Gizeh as well. Gizeh has like so many lines of text, and it sort of like alters the rules of the game. It's that kind of thing where once you start kind of seeing cards where there's like lots of text and they start altering the rules of the game a bit, you do have to pay a bit more attention. And in a time setting in a tournament, that can be a bit of a headache if you're not as kind of familiar with what's going on. That could be the main downside of crests, but I do think they would make these decks more interesting, because it's like you bring back the old grade 3s and you're not creeping them out the game. So that's already a massive plus, because that's one of the problems we have with V-Series, well, ever since V-Series started, was that they haven't really done anything to bring back old grade 3s since. Like, there's only been very few examples. I think like Luard, the old grade 3 Luard is an example, but then obviously V-Series has kind of like picked up and we've not seen people playing the old Luard since. So it's a weird one, but yeah, I definitely do want to see Stratas being pushed again. I just think it'd be nice if they're the old ones, just like they're doing in the Stride deck sets. I think that's a good direction. Next, we got Majin Ken saying standard reprint set for crucial cards and PRs, another P-Clan collection set and or revival selection, so I can slowly realize my goal of starting premium format and reprint of VRs for V Premium. Yeah, so the PRs are definitely something that have been getting really annoying. It's another thing that's been putting people off right now, because there's just so much being done now that it's made players this year feel like it's almost like, wow, you don't want us to play D format almost, because it's like there's more and more barriers, and it's like people just aren't going to be asked. Like, they're just not going to bother engaging with the product anymore, and it's definitely a downside to it. And then yeah, another P-Clan collection is always going to be great. I hope they do revise things more, just try out something a bit different. Revel selection, so yeah, there's the whole thing about VRs. We're supposed to have like a reissue protection thing. There's not been any announcements yet about new VRs coming out, but we had a weird situation where, because they reprinted like all the high rarity cards that aren't VRs, so like triple rares and even double rares, like all the good stuff in the main V boosters, what it's really caused is that in the main sets for V series, the only good cards to pull are the VRs now. Mostly, like there's very few cards that aren't VR that you'd want to pull, i.e. Percival if you're looking at Divine Lightning Raids. By the way, banned in V format, and also Hamiel's banned in V format, which is also from the same set, and the Grade 3 Surges all been reprinted, easy to get. Critical Triggers reprinted, the Sentinel crits. So, and also COU Seal and Norn reprinted. So really, the only cards you really care about maybe Eradicators and VRs. And I think VRs have a slight higher pull rate in late V, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's kind of an awkward one because what it does is it means then people are less incentivized to actually open cases, and stores also have a harder time shifting them. So they should have been they should have done the reprints differently. Like, I think V Clan Collection is probably one of the worst ways they've handled some reprints. Some reprints were good, but I think this whole idea of like every card should have the same pull rate is just risky in a way. So there have been like a lot of attempts to try and be a bit more careful with reprints for the most part in this game's history, but I think this is like one of the most clumsiest ones where it's almost like they just don't really want to try and think about how it kind of affects stores and everything. So yeah, I think now what it's caused is that VRs are probably worth more now because of this. And like, why would you open new product to release VRs if you're not going to make any money back from opening such boxes? And they've even had to be sold on the clearance price because it's just that bad. Now we've got Stay Woke saying support for older decks like Zambaku and Yasui, mainly main deck units and strides. So stop doing encounter cards so often to keep the game fresh with new ideas, not old stuff. So I think like yeah, like support for older decks. It's like, this is the thing, like you don't really want to see them constantly like replacing the grade 3s with like a new retrain, because really every time we get like say a new Regalia deck, right, they're basically kind of just kicking the old grade 3 out and replacing it with a new grade 3. And well, not every single time, but there's always like this sort of phase that have happened where it's not actually the same deck, it's just a new deck, but they just change the AS, well, they have the same ASA but just change what cards you're actually literally playing in it. And there's just a few like old legacy cards you might play from back then, but it's really like not really much the same except for the G zone, which obviously comes in from G era. But like, you look at the Regalia deck from the end of G, there's not really much from, you know, old Vanguard that you're playing. If you look at the V deck right now, there's more V cards being played, and then now you look at the D series and it's just a complete different deck entirely. But you're not playing that, you know, same Angelic Break Ride or that same Minerva grade 3 from back in BT14. So they do tend to always cycle things out over and over, and that happens a lot with V series, because obviously V series is doing a lot of retraining, but because there's just so much of it, I think what it's caused is this kind of feeling where it's like, wow, you're just like selling the same thing but like rehash and power crept, and there's not really as much like the new stuff either, and it starts to kind of look like it kind of just gave like an impression, like it's just like nostalgia fan service basically. And when going to Overdress, people were hyped to Overdress because there was a lot of new units, and it was just kind of like doing something that was very lacking, people felt like, in V series. Now that's not to say every deck was nostalgia retrain, because we have seen once they kind of got past the, you know, the retelling of the Vanguard manga, which obviously is kind of the reason why we saw a lot of similar cards, because they were going through some cards they originally released back in the days, but then because they want to like adapt, I guess, this anime, right, it would have for them commercially they want to like launch a card game alongside it, and that's how you end up with all these Imperial Daughter retrains and everything to begin with. But then it just kind of kept on going and going. They just started making other stuff like Blue Wave, Valios, etc., like Gastille grade 3s, blah blah blah, new Chaos Breaker Dragon, all these things that didn't even appear in that, you know, story. But then before all that, we had also Infinite Deity Cradle, which was the start of the Shinnamon arc, where we had Hanzo, we had Astro Poets, and we had God Hand as well. And so Isabel came out as well quite soon after that. And these decks, and also Malkuth Malak, but these decks were all like originals. And that was actually like some of the most interesting times in the V series because we saw new stuff, because we just had so much of the, like, I don't mind nostalgia, but I think I can kind of see why people get put off, because when you've got like too much of it, it starts to get seen as a negative. And we've seen how many Dragonic Overlords they've made in this game, right? And once we went into D series, set 2, bam, another Dragonic Overlord. You thought you can go 3 months without a new Overlord, and then it just kept well, it kind of just went on a bit more, because there was a whole thing about, oh yeah, we'll just do like encounters once a year, which, to be fair, that was a pledge that was never going to work out. They did the same thing with Lyrical Monsteria. They said it was going to be once a year, then we had 2. It's happened with encounters, but I think encounters, if you're going to do it, like the moment you started doing encounters, there was just no point really holding back, because like, why should only like a few cards, just because they are the most hyped fanboy cards in the game, why should they be the only ones getting encounters? So then it just means, well, why can't we Genesis players have an encounter? Why can't Power Moons have, Power Moon have their Silverthorn encounter, etc.? So, I mean, it's a direction that logically made the most sense to start going down after that point in the end. So that's kind of like, I think, why we're in this sort of area now. But yeah, we'll just see how it goes, really. Like, it's definitely a weird one, because you're now trying to like push new stuff and old stuff at the same time. But obviously, it would be kind of weird if encounters took too long to come out, because if you went from like you just have a few every year, right? Then it's gonna be like really weird. Like, let's just say you have Dragon Overlord, and then you finally get around to, let's just say, Vermilion Kaiser, right? Then how many years would have passed since Overlord came out? And what would the power level of the game be like by that point? Like, are we just going to now look at Overlord as this really bad grade 3 card, or is it going to start feeling like Vermilion just took ages to come? So there's always that kind of thing where the timeliness is probably going to also put a bit of pressure as well. Next, the was saying, I stopped playing Vanguard because it just boiled down to beatdown. So that's yeah, that's a kind of a very Vanguard thing, actually, because the whole game is basically like a tempo game where you're always kind of smacking phase as much as you can, and you're trying to get through guard, everything. So it's basically, if the deck that you're up against has too much guard and your offense is just bad, then you just can't get through and win. It just becomes like impossible, and you just deck out. So there's always that, like, you have to always it's sort of like why the game is kind of somewhat of an arms race, because this whole idea of having clan support, I think like casual decks are great and everything, and it's always nice to be able to get stuff. I think every deck should always be given finishers of some sort, like solid finishers, so they don't just lose a deck out. But obviously, there's this whole thing with once you kind of once you kind of lose out on the pressure, and the opponent's building a really good hand, it's just not possible to break through. But yeah, that's kind of like how decks become relevant, how decks can fall off as well. Resident mentioned make colony type units in D series. I don't think we've actually had any bugs at all, have we? If I'm mistaken. And then next we've got Vox mentioning because standard prices get out of hand, they can make gold series or tin series as reprint of popular cards. Throw NPLs in as well. Also would love a stronger V-Clan collection, since that also has boost for premium. For BCS or BSF, do it deluxe style Japanese. So I don't actually know what deluxe style means. I have to kind of look into that one. But yeah, gold series would be good. Reprint sets, having bling, it's always a good thing. And it's also an opportunity to reprint other cards that people just need in general. That's something we are missing in this game. Release the big 6. Yeah, you might as well. I mean, what difference is there really between that and what's kind of running around right now? I mean, if reindeer is a thing, if galley is a thing, then maybe. Over triggers. I mean, I think Katrina, to be fair, at this point should just be unbanned. There's literally like no point of Katrina being on the restriction if some of the stuff is allowed to float around. Over triggers, bans in all formats, less ride line, and focus on the existing one. I wish we only get one new ride line each year for each nation. Okay, so this is like a different direction to, like, say for example that Fires Collection idea, right? So some people don't really like seeing too many decks getting support, or rather inventing too many decks. I can understand that. I think the thing is, because D series is like a new format, and it's very isolated as well from premium, it's like there's probably more of a craving for diversity as soon as possible. Like people want more and more ride lines in D series, and so people are just kind of like sitting there waiting for that kind of ride line they really love to show up. Like there's so many themes that haven't actually unlocked yet as well. But obviously I can understand like there's this idea because there's like there's been sort of like an arms race kind of environment at times of the game where it's like, okay, you want to play this deck, right? But if there's too many distractions away from supporting or even just giving your deck options, that's obviously like a trade-off, right? Obviously that's kind of like, it's always a balancing act with card games. But yeah, I can kind of see where it's coming from with that one. Next we've got Lucas mentioning reprints, so another one there. Chris Silva mentioning Unbound Taro. That is the greatest thing I've heard all day. But it is definitely like a really bad restriction because they kind of just ruined the entire clan except for Regalia. So that's why right now for the past year you've only seen any sort of representation from Regalia, because in the premium format, the kind of defense creep and everything that goes on, you need aggression, like you need some really good push power in premium format. And the thing is game opponents at 6 is very hard with anything that's not Regalia, or even just managing your resources, because Taro was also like a free card in the sense that you didn't even pay Camelot's cost. A lot of the Camelot's cost was from G units and from support cards as well, and obviously there's a lot of interactions that were good as well with that, but there's just so much stuff. It's like the strides were basically kind of nerfed around it so much, so once you kind of take out that piece that was supposed to support like whatever stride you go on, and then obviously you can't just dismantle it. I think the best thing to do is just compare it to Great Nature. That's an easy example. If you took Crown Tiger or any card similar to it out, then you can't just ruin it, because now those strides just don't mean anything, and it's just a deck that's just, it's like kind of like a wimpy punch basically every turn, and your opponent meanwhile is, oh, let's go Haltruder, let's go bounce 2 cards, rear guards I just attacked with and call them again like Pearl Scissors or something, right? And then you just go, okay, Reindeer now swing, and then re-ride Lupina, restand Pearl Scissors, attack with Lupina, Pearl Scissors, attack. Oh, I've got an Axe Circle, forgot that bit. Okay, attack with that too. Like it's just like you compare that and that together. Oh, and also Q-Tite added perfect cards to hand, or Resius, or some G-Guard that you can call Resius with, or you know, you kind of get the picture, right? Like you compare like what some of these decks can do now compared to something like that, and you kind of just think, hold on, how is that fair? So that's the thing, like you have to be able to kind of get past the defenses. And as I mentioned just earlier with one of the comments, you need decks do need their pressure cards. You can't just take pressure cards out of a clan, otherwise you just devastate it, and that's why you're going to get people pissed off about it if they want to play this clan. And you know, some people might say, oh, just go play another clan then. Well, you're literally now at this point forcing people to not play some of their favorite decks, or you're just kind of forcing it out of them, which this game is kind of built on the idea of clans, and you know, you pick the ones you enjoy and you play them, or you build your kind of like knowledge base, you kind of journey with it. It's a lot more fun actually, like when you get used to a clan, because there's like another dimension, like a kind of hobby to it, where you're kind of like learning more and more, and you're kind of just focusing on it, and then you get to do, you feel like you want to do all this creative stuff with it, or like you just like to explore the depths of it, and it becomes really fun. Like you like to kind of play with it both casually, obviously competitively as well, like both kind of sides of it. It's like another way, it's like a really interesting way to kind of deeply enjoy the game, which you couldn't find in other ways. So and obviously this is what it's all about. It's about like trying to, like you find your ways of enjoying the game. Everyone enjoys the game in different ways, and you know, you do you. And for a lot of people out there, this is definitely an appeal about the game. It's like a selling point of cards like Vanguard, so you can't just take that away and just be like, no, go play a different clan. So I have seen a bit of complaints right now about stun versus restriction, and trust me, it's nowhere near as bad as what Genesis players went through, by the way, not even the slightest. Next we have Team Best Girl mentioned reprints as well, Andrew Jackson also mentioning reprint sets, and lastly we've got single or double rare boss units. Let me get my deck building juices flowing. So this is very similar to what happened with the promos as well. There was like a promo card. I think there's a game promo as well, the Dear Days card, where there's like some sort of new boss card they made. I don't know if it has a grade 0, 1, and 2, but it does have a grade 3. So there's also Graham Grace as well. So it's this sort of thing, I think, like just having more of that. They sometimes do make cards like that, but I don't know how many they've done for D series. I think V series had a lot more of these kind of budget bosses than maybe D did. And by budget bosses, I mean something that isn't the maximum base rarity. So like in the case of V, it would be like, you know, double rare and triple rares. In the case of D, we're just talking double rares probably at most, because obviously triple rare is not the new maximum. So yeah, that's oh, there's another comment here. Victor is trying to draw, says don't forget vanilla triggers and perfect guards in the boxes. I don't know why they stopped after V. It was fun making decks around grade 3s with V/R skills. Yeah, that's actually that's a good point, because the thing is with vanilla triggers, I didn't actually notice they cut these, by the way, but I do know they're definitely in the start of the series. I remember them, I think, in DSET 1. I remember getting vanilla fronts and things like that. And the thing with vanilla triggers is, for a lot of people, especially in my echo chamber, we would just say, oh yeah, this is just a waste of cardboard and everything, right? But you can say about a lot of cards. But the thing is that the whole point of vanilla triggers is that you're still selling a product that you intend for like a wider audience, and there's different groups in those audiences. So the whole point here is that you may have people who just want to be able to build decks out of a box, and they may not even be the most optimal deck. There are also budget players as well. Like, not everyone is trying to build the optimal competitive deck to go into tournament with. There's like all kinds of different reasons people pick up cards, and that's the thing. There's nothing actually wrong with vanilla triggers being printed. It just means that you want the, you know, the specific target audience for that particular thing. That's all it is. But yeah, that's more or less it for me going through all these comments. And I guess since it's the end of the new year, happy new year to everyone, and I will see you guys around in 2023. Goodbye.